It sure has been a while since I made a video talking about matchups, hasn't it? Well, today I'm going to be talking about my favourite matchups that involve Danganronpa characters or just one Danganronpa character, explaining the connections and the fight potential as to why I like it. Now, Danganronpa is a pretty unique series when it comes to talking about versus matchups for them, because typically series can fall into either one of two categories, being either one that works as a physical fight, which is most series, or being an intellectual based fight, one where one party is trying to outsmart the other. But Danganronpa can fall into both of these, so I won't specify what type of matchup it is whenever I cover them. However, some of them should be pretty self-evident. This video will also be split up into 4 separate parts, each one covering each game, but since Ultra Despair goes as Ultra Despair goes, I'll also include the anime and other spin-offs in the category so it can really fill it out. I also won't go into extreme detail with every single matchup here, since if the video is going to be super long anyways, and it's going to be even longer if I go into every bit of detail each matchup has. Hell, one matchup literally has over 2 times the amount of words a high school essay does, so what I'll do is I'll link a Google Doc in the description, which links all of the Versus Connection wiki pages to each matchup, explaining each one in full detail if you're interested on the topic. The last thing is, this is an opinion-based list. Of course, you're free to disagree, and there are plenty of things that come down to personal bias when it comes to matchups, so don't be a dick in the comments, just whatever you do. And if you enjoy this video and want to see more like it, make sure to like, subscribe, comment below your favourite matchups from Danganronpa, and let's get started with Trigger Happy Havoc, the first game in the series. Let's start with honourable mentions. Firstly, Junko/Monokuma versus Chris the Major and the Joker are all banger matchups in my opinion, but probably one of them should have made the list, but personal bias says otherwise with another matchup, and if you're the type of person to watch an opinionated list and not expect there to be bias, and you're also the type of person to walk into a forest and not expect to see trees, so it's not really my problem. Anyways, Junko versus Dio was also considered, mostly just because it's funny and it would be kind of cool to see them interact personality-wise. Toko versus Launch is fucking awesome, but lacks a lot of connections beyond the little it has. Makoto versus Junpei seems cool, but I haven't played Zero Escape, so I don't have much of a personal connection to it. Same with Sakura Ogami versus Kasa Shishizo. By the way, Yasuhiro Hagakure versus Joseph Joestar is also funny, but I cannot take it even remotely seriously, hence it's not in the top 10. Kiyotaka Ishimaru versus Tenya Ida has good connections, but literally no fight potential at all. Mukuro versus Raiden sounds fun, but I'm not super into it, same with Mukuro versus Kanayo. Kyoko Kirigiri versus Keiichi Shinogi does sound very cool, and I love both characters a lot, but for some reason it just doesn't really click with me. Celeste versus Yumiko is very fun and a very unique matchup, but I'm not personally connected to Yumiko, so it doesn't really quite hit for me. And finally, Celeste versus D. Vasquez is pretty cool, but the reason why it's not on the list is because D. Vasquez literally only has one chapter and one Ace Attorney game to her name, so I cannot get super invested in it. Anyways, number 10. Kyoko Kirigiri versus Franziska von Karma. The gist is pretty simple. Both Kyoko and Franziska are both from the 2 biggest crime-solving families in the world, and being the current representatives of their family, with their main goal being to hunt down a family member who left them, which made them feel alone and betrayed, in order to cut ties with them or quote-unquote defeat them. The main reason I like this matchup is not only because of their family history, but also because of their personalities and how they contrast, but are also very similar. Neither of them ever want to show their real thoughts or feelings, and thus puts a wall and a facade around them in order to hide how they're truly feeling, however in contrasting ways. Kyoko is quiet and reserved, while Franziska is arrogant and very aggressive and violent. So yeah, I really do like these two and how similar they are. It can also be a fun battle as well. They'd both be investigating the same crime and try and solve it together, and even debate each other in the process. All in all, it's pretty fun. It's not my favourite for both of them, since Franziska has Mellow from Death Note, which I really like for her, and Kyoko we'll talk about later on. Number 9. Monokuma versus Koro Sensei. They are both inhuman, goofy, childish quote-unquote teachers at schools, where their goal is to cause people to kill someone else. But the main reason why this matchup is so interesting is because how they perfectly mirror each other. Monokuma would kill his students without a second thought if they broke the rules, and seek students to kill each other constantly. Meanwhile, Koro Sensei wants the students to learn how to kill him and would protect their lives no matter what. It's also a pretty fun fight dynamic as well, with Koro Sensei having to just destroy destroy armies of Monokumas. Why isn't it higher on the list? Well, I've only just read the first volume of Assassination Classroom, so I'm not super invested in this yet, at least more than I already am. And yes, even within the first volume, I like this as an idea. It just goes to show how well they fit each other, I suppose. Number 8. Mondo Owada vs Tenga Onigawara. They are both anime high schoolers who threaten to, and often do, beat the shit out of people and are a part of infamous gangs. Despite that, they're both kind at heart and wish to see others around them improve and get stronger. They're also both confirmed to be inspired by Josuke Higashikata as well, which just further ties them together. There are certainly matchups that aren't in the top 10 that are more thematic than this one. But one thing that the other matchups lack that this one has is being simultaneously funny and fucking awesome. I love both of them. I think it's a bit of a stomp though, sadly. Number 7. Junko Enoshima vs So Hiyori. The gist here is that they both play massive parts in creating very similar killing games with a very similar cast of characters. Within these games, they have people who impersonate them, taking on their face and personality and clothes, and eventually die because of it. This person knew just how psychotic and evil Junko and So were, but went along with it anyways just due to how manipulative Junko and So are. Both Junko and So managed to inexplainably erase everybody's memories of before the killing games, and are the master of disguise and deception, literally hiding in plain sight while they commit their horrendous deeds. They both go by fake names multiple times, work within evil groups, and come back from the dead as a super advanced AI, and both participate in their own death games as well, which is what ultimately kills them. This matchup is awesome and is one I made myself, so obviously I'm going to be more attached to it. The only reason why it's not higher is because it's not a great fight interaction. The only way I can really see it is either So or the other dolls fighting the Monokumas, or an intelligence fight, which is more fun on paper, but I'm not entirely sure how it would work since they're both masterminds, or at least leaders of games, so having two leaders of two different games go at it doesn't really fit in my opinion, but hey, I love these two so much that I couldn't really leave it out of the top 10. Number 6. Byakuya Togami vs Miles Edgeworth. These two are incredibly stuck-up, arrogant, intelligent rivals to the main protagonist who will do anything to win, including fabricating evidence and messing with investigations, even when they themselves want to quote-unquote find the truth. They also both come from extremely well-known families, canonically have simps that they don't want, and show up in spin-off games where they have much bigger roles. There's a hell of a lot more to this matchup, but honestly, these are just the reasons why it's so good, with the main appeal being their personalities, and how they underwent character arcs to prove upon these personalities. This also makes sense as an intelligence battle, as seeing them debate and act so high and mighty over others for no reason would be very entertaining, I think. I will say that Byakuya vs Franziska also works, but not as well as Kyoko does for Franziska or Edgeworth does for Byakuya, in my opinion. Number 5. Mukuro Ikosaba vs Mikasa Ackerman. This mostly uses Mukuro from the Danganronpa If novel, but whatever. They are both dark-haired female anime characters who are literally a one-person army, being a master in hand-to-hand combat and with weaponry, to the point where they can fight almost anyone with absolutely no problem. They both fight inhuman monsters, being Monokumas and Titans, which have a weak spot near their head, and also join groups known for fighting, being Friend Year and the Scouts, but later go on to join on bigger groups, being the Ultimate Despair and the Survey Corps. They both have an older relative they were separated from at birth, but would meet up again when they joined said groups, being Junko and Levi. They both look up to these people and will do anything they can to help them, while contrast with Mukuro going on to betray Junko and join the side of good, meanwhile Mikasa would never ever betray Levi. They also have a contrast for what they're fighting for, which is the end of the world and this to save humanity. They both canonically have a crush on the naive main character who saved their lives at some point, being Makoto and Eren, both of whom want to do everything they can to save humanity, despite being seen as very suspicious by all of their peers, at least at some point. And eventually they help the heroes escape from the walls that keep them within a place that they keep on dying in. All in all, this is a really cool fight. Interaction potential also makes sense too, with hand-to-hand fighting along with Mukuro's weapons versus the ODM gear. It'd be pretty cool, and I generally think this matchup speaks for itself. Number 4. Junko Enoshima vs Springtrap. I'm not spending any time on this matchup. I've made an entire video dedicated to why I like this matchup, so I know this matchup gets a ton of shit, and I sort of understand why, but if you want to know why I'm a fan of it, I encourage you to watch that video. It will be linked separately from the other matchups, and will also be in the iCards. Number 3. Makoto Naegi and Kyoko Kirigiri versus Phoenix Wright and Maya Fey. Both Makoto and Phoenix are the main characters of two of the most well-known visual novel video games of all time, where you investigate murders and find the culprit afterwards in a trial. They also both show up in future entries but aren't the main character, as they're in a position where they were stripped away from after a specific event due to the antagonists. For example, Makoto was placed under arrest from the Future Foundation due to trying to save Ultimate Despair, and Phoenix was disbarred from law due to unknowingly presenting fake evidence. They both have close familial ties to a young female character who plays an iconic duo in a future game. They also both solve cases where the killer tried to, burn their bloody clothing and was found next to the incinerator, being Mimi Maine and Leon Kawata. They also both try and frame someone else while doing this as well. They both have plotlines surrounding around a lost memory, being Phoenix in the first case of the second game and literally all of Danganronpa 1. They both have cocky, stuck-up rivals who they are shipped with, being Edgeworth and Byakuya, both of which only see victory as the most important thing and are from esteemed families. They both have character arcs to come becoming better, but are both still arrogant people as well. Lastly, both Phoenix and Makoto end up challenging the very system that they are in, going against a very manipulative leader, which is of course very dangerous due to the consequences of if they fail, but they do ultimately win. They're also both known as beacons of truth and hope, which will help defend the innocent and find the truth, and honestly, I really rock with it. The debate potential is also really fun as well. Of course, this courtroom debate would be about a specific murder that happened. In this, Makoto and Phoenix would butt heads. Now, you might be confused as to why I included Maya and Kyoko in this since I haven't mentioned them once, but this is what makes the debate potential even better. Since the interaction potential is a lot higher when their personalities can bounce off each other. Makoto and Kyoko would both be working together as a duo, while Phoenix essentially works alone while Maya chips in with one or two lines here and there, which I think is just much better than just having Phoenix and just having Makoto. This can lead to a moment where Makoto and Kyoko manage to corner Phoenix together, only for Maya to bail him out at the last minute, which gives him enough time to think of a counter-argument and bring the debate back, which is just a lot more in character. You can also have a moment where both Phoenix and Makoto catastrophically fail at the same time, and show their silly sprites as well in order to show that side of their characters. And also just provide comic relief as well. The debate would just end the same way, depending on who you think wins. It would just be flipped. The background surrounding Phoenix would go black, just as it happens whenever he's backed into a corner, and tries to think of it from the case with a new angle. As this happens, Makoto's thinking about the case, with Kyoko having completely given up, but Makoto's able to push through due to his power of hope. The debate gets even more fierce until suddenly Phoenix's words come up as white subtitles on the screen, and his sentence suddenly becomes yellow, where Makoto fires a truth bullet through it and you get a no, that's wrong, basically just being a bullet time event. However, just as Makoto seems as though he has won, you get interrupted with an objection shouted very loud from Phoenix, who proceeds to win the case. If you want a super objection in there as well, you can have Maya begin to see Mia within Phoenix, just how Godot begin to see it within Phoenix as well. Of course, if you have Makoto and Kyoko win, you can have the situation but flipped. This matchup is very, very cool, and the Brandon Yates track also goes absolutely insane. Though honestly, having a Phoenix Wright track without his iconic Pursuit theme feels weird, but honestly the track is that good, I'll allow it. Number 2. Genocide Jack vs Himiko Toga. They're both evil anime characters with an obsession for blood. They're both serial killers who use bladed weapons and only kill boys who they think are pretty. They're also both lewd, do with that what you will, and both turn out that way because of how society treated them, having several years of negative and emotional suppression caused by society and their parents before finally snapping and killing people. They both end up having crushes on main characters but never get to kill them. They also go through and change identities as well, with Toko's split personality and Toga with her blood. They both join groups which share a common goal, the League of Villains and the Future Foundation, but they contrast with the League of Villains wanted to bring the world into chaos, while the Future Foundation wants to rid the world of despair. They both contrast with Toga being an antagonist, while Genocide Jack fights on the side of good despite being evil in nature. They also contrast with Toga wanting to make new friends, and Toko hates the idea of making friendships. All in all, this might just be my favourite Danganronpa physical fight. If not, it's certainly up there, since it can lead to really gruesome and awesome scenes. If Toga wins, you can have a bloody and brutal victory where she stabs Genocide Jack over and over again. You can have a point where Jack turns back into Toko as she is scared and dies alone and painfully. Meanwhile, Toga, could take on the appearance of Genocide Jack using her blood-related abilities and run off. However, if Genocide Jack wins, you can have her use one of her moves in Despair Girls to pin Toga against the wall with her scissors before eventually finishing the job. You can also have a short scene afterwards of Deku or some other heroes finding Toga's body in the same way that all Genocide Jack victims are, suspended in the air with the word bloodlust written to them next to Toga's corpse. All in all, it's really solid, and honestly it might be debatable as to who wins as well. I might make a video on it at some point. And number 1, Kyoko Kirigiri versus L. Lolly. This should be no surprise to anyone who's been around my community for the last few months, since I am the one who commissioned the Werewolf track of this matchup. They are both detective prodigies who were isolated from everyone bar a parental figure, who solved countless crimes from the background and were considered the greatest detectives in the world. When they were younger, they both worked for the first time with a slightly older detective in a series of murder cases, disguised as games in order to draw out the main detective, being the dual murderers in the LABB murder case. They also both wanted revenge on people who killed their loved ones, being Mayu and Rai. They both went on to face with a killer who had been sheltered all their life, and took the appearance of themselves who, for personal reasons, almost committed suicide, being Kyoka and Bibi. Also have relations to eating people as well. They both purposefully hid from the public, only coming out with the purpose of tracking one particular person down, to the point where they were scouted by prestigious schools, being Hope's Peak Academy and Toho University, which stemmed from their pride and egos as detectives. They also both come from a long lineage of detectives themselves, with an older father-like figure who took care of them and deeply cherished them, despite not being their real fathers. They both willingly go to extreme measures in order to weed out the culprits of their cases, which they hold no remorse for. One example is Kyoko almost committing arson, and Elle having Lindell Taylor die in order to find out where Kira was. One of the few unresolved cases they weren't able to solve was related to an individual originally looking down on the rest of society who unexpectedly got godlike powers, eventually turning into a person bored with the world that they live in, who wanted to change it for the better but ended up making it ruled by fear instead, being Izuru and Light. They both lived in a place specifically designed for their safety, including two people who are responsible for the events of the entire series and the true culprits of the Earth's downfall, only to then get massive cult followings as well, being Junko and Mukuro and Light and Misa. They both underwent pseudonyms, which show a drastic change in character, with certain actions being broadcasted live on TV, being Monokuma, Despair and Punishments, and Kira, Justice and Heart Attacks. There's a lot more for Junko vs. Light, but honestly, that's all you need to know when talking about Kyoko vs. L at least. Both L and Kyoko are either killed or succeed in catching Junko and Light, depending on what timeline you go down and what spin-off you read. But canonically, they both do die at some point, leaving their trusted predecessors to take over for them. This isn't even all the connections that Kyoko and L have, but it's pretty stacked. But what about fight potential? Well, L in the L Save the World novel is seen as a threat due to being unable to be controlled by the government. So in this fight, Kyoko, as the head of her Region of Future Foundation, would be tasked with finding L. You can have the two having back and forth, having giga-brain moments one-upping each other, and the end would involve Kyoko and L meeting face to face, with either Kyoko backing L into a corner and catching him despite his best efforts, or L being able to escape in a similar way he escapes a terrorist group in the novels, getting away right under their noses. These two are my favourite fictional characters of all time, or one of my favourite fictional characters of all time. Since Kyoko is my favourite character in Danganronpa 1, and L is just my favourite Death Note character, period. So it really does frustrate me whenever someone shits on this matchup for having a lack of fight potential, when it clearly does have that. Goodbye Despair is up next, so let's start with honourable mentions. Fuyuhiko vs Bakugo, Ibuki vs Reiko, and Kazuichi vs Anasui would be very cool, but they don't have any sort of fight potential at all. Mikan vs Harley is fine, I guess, but only really works because of Junko vs Joker. Teru vs Mineta sure does exist. Akane vs Yang is fun, but not amazing. Nagito vs Milo Murphy is a really fun fight, but has literally zero connections to tie them together besides being lucky, and there's a lot more to Nagito's character than just that. Peko versus Afro Samurai is very cool, but if, I couldn't really fit it in the top 10 to be honest, because, there's just that many stacked matchups. Similarly, Gundam vs Owain and Gundam vs Atticus are also very cool, the latter of which would be number 11 if the list continued on. But Without further ado, let's start with number 10, Nagito Komaeda vs Fuko Izumo. The gist is that they are anime characters with supernatural luck. At first, this backfires horribly on them, with their own luck being what causes the deaths of their parents, which oddly enough happen involving planes. They both at some point use their luck to kill people via meteors, and eventually learn to weaponize their luck. Due to their untouchable nature, both of them become very self-loathing, but contrast with how it affects them as a character, since Nagito becomes psychotic, meanwhile Fuko is much more normal with her depression. They also both show admiration for someone who's able to bypass or match their luck as well, being Izuru and Ande. Their luck is also triggered by something, being either bad luck or physical touch. I really do like this matchup since it's really just Nagito versus Milo, but with actual connections. The batshit crazy nature of luck and reality seeming to be fucked around with the fact that these two are just insanely lucky is a very good fight potential. The only reason why I have this so low is because, like with Monokuma vs Koro Sensei, I've only read the first volume of Undead Unluck, so after I finish the series, this will probably be much higher, and is leaps and bounds Nagito's best fighting matchup in my opinion. Number 9. Hajime Hinata vs Apollo Justice. Now, I have been vocal in the past about how I don't like this matchup, since at first I thought this was just the second protagonist of Danganronpa and Ace Attorney, and while that is a big part of the matchup, it's a lot more thematic than I thought it was, as literally every case that they have similarities to each other. This debate is also pretty cool too, due to how different Hajime and Apollo are from Makoto and Phoenix, so solid matchup in my eyes. Number 8. Nagito Komaeda vs Mello. They're both extremely intelligent characters with inferiority complexes, which cause them to be super obsessive over one thing and who they are inferior to. They both willingly go to extreme measures for their goals, kidnapping people and in Nagito's case, literally killing himself. They both attempt to kill large amounts of people at once, are extremely manipulative, and become overshadowed by those who they try to defeat, who were at some point just used by pawns by someone else, much to their dismay. I really do like this matchup for Nagito, as an intelligence battle between the two would sure be a sight. However, my preferred for Nagito is number 7, Nagito Komaeda vs Godot. They're both antagonists from sequel cult classic murder mystery visual novels. They both slowly die from illnesses which cause their hair to turn white. They both have a distaste for the protagonist due to the protagonist's pasts, and both tie strongly into the 5th case of the game, being heavily associated with a fire due to the events of this case. They both tie into the 4th case of each game, including a brief moment where you control them, or just, are directly with them. They also both have a hatred for a woman who ruined their lives prior to the game, but ultimately contrast, while Godot is calm and suave, meanwhile Komaeda is twisted and maniacal, and while Godot starts hating Phoenix, he eventually comes to terms with him and forgives Phoenix, whereas Komaeda is friendly to Hajime, but after finding out his past, becomes cold and spiteful towards him. I prefer this to Mello due to his covering more unique parts of his character. I also think their characters just bounce off each other better as well, since I think that Nagito fits better when he is the sole maniac of a battle, and Godot is the more reserved and yet intelligent person, which fits that perfectly in my opinion. Anyways, the bottom half of this list have been filled with Nagito matchups, and this is the last one here, so moving on. Number 6. Izuru Kamakura vs John Doe. They both attended schools with extraordinary people where a hierarchy exists because of talents/powers of these students, yet were ultimately someone who lacked any of these talents or powers. Despite this, they grew up bitter and jealous until one day they got the opportunity to get the most powerful gift of their worlds. But by being given these powers, the two of them would go down a darker path and would lose sight of who they were, including their friends as well. They both undergo very questionable methods of therapy in order to solve this issue, and would take on different identities and go through class life like they did before. However, these lives would be ones of survival, and this is at the point where the readers are first introduced to them. There's a lot more to it than that, but their backstories are so darn similar that it sounds very cool. The only reason why it isn't higher up on the list is because I haven't read Unordinary, and every other matchup at here, like above this, I have a personal connection to. So yeah, the top 5 is pretty stacked in my opinion, even if it's just personal bias. Number 5. Chiaki Nanami vs Rio Ranger. Now, I know anyone who knows these two may be looking at me as if I just shat my pants in public, but the reason why I like these two is because they are on the opposite sides of the same coin. They were both once good people who lived ordinary lives but died due to death-filled incidents. Those who they were close to, who managed to survive, go on to participate in death games, when Chiaki and Rio were also participate in them as well. However, for this to be the case, they were both remade into super accurate AI versions of themselves after their deaths, with a new chance of life. However, how they contrast is quite simple. Chiaki is a player in the death games, meanwhile Rio is a leader within the games. Chiaki is one of the kindest people within the games, meanwhile Rio was literally programmed to only have negative emotions. Some items Chiaki wears are given to her friends after her death, meanwhile Rio wears the items from dead participants. Chiaki is the ultimate gamer, meanwhile Rio Ranger leads the floor known for minigames. Rio Ranger also has an adoptive brother while he was alive, but has since forgotten. Meanwhile Chiaki is the only child while she was alive, but now has quote-unquote siblings in her AI states. Their fathers also have ties as well, with Chiaki's being the one who made the Neo World program. Meanwhile, Rio Ranger's father helps lead the death games himself. They both die again at the cause of the death of another participant, but once again in contrasting ways, as Rio blatantly kills Reiko/Alice and gets killed for it due to not following the Floor Master's code. Meanwhile, Chiaki just unintentionally killed Nagito, which got her voted out in the class trial, which meant that she died so that everyone else could live on. After their deaths, their AI would reappear in contrasting ways, with Rio's being used in a horrifying killing machine used to try and kill one of the participants. Meanwhile, Chiaki shows up to help Hajime when he's at his lowest to help him emerge victorious in the class trial and save everybody. Their deaths also contrast, with Rio being hated by everybody, including his own father. Meanwhile, Chiaki died with everybody loving her, desperately trying to save her. Honestly, I really like this. The fight is also pretty easy to explain, as Chiaki would just have to clear every attraction that Rio has set up with her without dying. It's pretty solid and plenty of potential, and is just so filled with character as well, due to how these two are very different but also the same. Number 4. Nekomaru Nidai vs Musashi Goda. They are two male characters who attend high schools who, despite being so big, buff, and having facial hair, they are also very scary or weird, but turn out to be very nice people. They also both are just the best hype men within their story and train weaker students to become strong, and also risk their lives to save someone who they trained, which results in them getting an inhuman power-up, with Nekomaru becoming a robot and Musashi being possessed by Dimple. These two are just the most manly, awesome characters out there. Fuck interesting fight potential, this shit is just awesome. Number 3. The Ultimate Imposter vs Shin Tsukimi. These are two male characters from visual novel games who unwillingly participate within killing games, which are very, very similar, and they both act as people who they are not, both dressing up as and acting like them and also taking their names, as Shin pretended to be So Hiyori and the Ultimate Imposter pretends to be Byakuya Togami, both of whom are extremely intelligent characters who lead corporations. They were both practically destined to die in the games despite their sneakiness and acting, with Shin having a 0% win rate in the hyper-realistic simulations of the killing games, and also dying in one of the endings as well. Meanwhile, the Ultimate Imposter was told that somebody was going to die, and he chose that to be himself. As a result, they both sacrifice themselves within the killing games. The cast later then meets the real version of the people they were pretending to be in contrasting ways, as So appeared as an antagonist and Byakuya came to try and save them. They're also both known for being good at making complex plans to fulfill their goals. Even if they are pretending to be a person they're not, it's very effective. Their games also have parts where they have free times between trials where you can interact with them and hang out with them, and if you get close to them you can get personal information from them. Both the Ultimate Imposter and Shin show signs of desperation, which breaks their character in order to protect someone close to them, being Kana, who is Shin's sister, and Ryota being the Ultimate Imposter's best friends. They're also both known for hopping between different lifestyles. They both impersonate someone who they were once friends with at some point, and even lived with at some point, being So and Ryota. They both are shown to have died via stabbing at some point, via in the nightmares and simulations that Shin has, and the Ultimate Imposter being stabbed to death under the table. They both have ties to liking types of food. They both turn evil after two people close to them were killed via an execution, via Kana and Shiake, but contrast with Shin still seeming to care for others deep down, while the Ultimate Imposter became the ultimate despair and helped kill countless people. But regardless of anything, their turns to evil result in more deaths occurring. Honestly, this is far better than Kokichi vs Shin in my opinion, since it nails their characters a lot more. The fight potential is also really fun as well. You would be both a part of the same killing game, along with Kana and Ryota as well, both perceiving each other as the biggest threats to everybody's safety, which would make sense since both of them would see through each other's disguises and both see each other as antagonistic or controlling. There could be a planning section before they face off in the trial, and then when they get to the trial, they show off their personalities a lot more, with Shin being more manipulative and cunning, meanwhile the Ultimate Imposter is more upfront and assertive. The debate goes on trying to get the either one voted. However, due to their intelligence, they both get ruled out for the others to vote for. After this, the people who they are closest to have the most amount of potential to be voted off. At this point, the debate continues, but slowly but surely, the Ultimate Imposter and Shin begin to panic as they just both fear that the people closest to them will die. This will be reflected in the music as well, as their flawless persona devolves into desperation and despair, before finally one of them gets an opening and gets the upper hand, completely crushing the desperate foe in the debate, as their personas can mix in and the real personality almost comes alive to the debate to take the win. If the Ultimate Imposter wins, he'd be much more methodical, calm and collected, and if Shin wins, he'd be much more, maniacal and being irate. All in all, better than Kokichi vs Shin, in my opinion. Number 2. Hajime Hinata vs Seiya Chidoin. Remember when I kept on talking about how these killing games are similar within Danganronpa and Your Turn to Die? Well, I'll explain them now. Hajime and Seiya are both high schoolers and the main protagonists of visual novel games, and unwillingly participate within killing games which start via mysteriously entering a door. These killing games involve at least 2 people dying, one of which will be decided in a trial where depending on what happens with votes and who gets voted. Within these trials, there are specific individuals who have certain roles, being the Blackened, along with the Sacrifice, Keymaster, and Sage, which are all decided before the trial starts, and will alter the outcome of the trial depending on who gets voted and who has which role. Both Hajime and Seiya end up taking on these trials by countering other people's arguments via presenting evidence and pitting them up against each other. These killing games are also mediated by inhuman characters who are horrific versions of toys, being Monokuma being a teddy bear and the dolls having super advanced AI. These killing games also contain certain members as well, which are very similar. This includes a dark-haired rock star well known around the world for being in a band despite having left it, a buff sportsman who doesn't really do sports anymore and is a role model, a quote-unquote nice guy that turns out to be manipulative, someone who's literally pretending to be someone else, even taking their name, and also a criminal capable of killing, both of whom lose girls who they are close to depending on what route is chosen within game. A cute little guy with some mental problems but with a big love for animals, and someone who got their hand or hands replaced with the hand or hands of the main antagonist. Both Hajime and Seiya lose their best friends to these games, who is even implied to potentially be a crush depending on interpretation. Of course, due to these losses, Hajime and Seiya lose it and literally begin to hallucinate them still being there. This hurts them even more because their best friends were voted to or not voted to because of what Hajime and Seiya did in the trials, but otherwise, if the inverse happened, everybody would have died. Both of their best friends would return, however, as an AI which helps them, free from their state of trauma and depression. They also both befriend someone who seems really nice at first but turns out to be extremely manipulative. They both have ties to someone who's missing their memories of the past, but they eventually uncover them as the games go on. They both get trapped on an island in a different game mode where the killing game doesn't happen. But most importantly, they have evil counterparts to themselves which are distinguished with red eye colours, which distinguish from their normal eye colour. These counterparts are considered brutal, efficient, and almost godlike by the antagonists, who wish to see that side of them take over Hajime and Seira. These forms contrast, however, with Hajime only existing in the virtual world, meanwhile Izuru exists in the real world. Meanwhile, Seira's quote-unquote true form only existed in hyper-realistic simulations, meanwhile the real Seira is much more her normal self. The debate between these two would also be gold, and the Brandon Yates track is also amazing. I don't know what else there is to say, to be honest, but it's not my number one favourite for Danganronpa 2. That would go to Izuru Kamakura versus Izuku Midoriya. This matchup barely even counted within my top 10 at first, but after doing a deep dive into Izuru's character along with the recent events of the My Hero Academia manga, I like this a lot more. Much like Shiaki vs Ryo, this matchup involves characters who are two sides of the same coin. They were both normal high schoolers with no talent or powers at all. During this time they would meet their best friends, but contrast with Shiaki being nice and Bakugo being Bakugo. Both would give the chance to receive all the most powerful abilities within their world, along with the title that they would inherit, which would make them the people's symbol of hope and peace, all given to them by the ones they looked up to and respected the most, gaining multiple incredible abilities. However, this contrasts with how it affected them, since Hajime was betrayed by the people he looked up to and had inhumane experiments performed on him in order to become the perfect human, which later caused him to become an antagonist, losing his entire personality and ideals to become the very idea of what talent is, and eventually bring the end of the world. Whereas, Deku would use his powers to become the hero he always dreamed of being, protecting everyone and saving people who had fallen into evil. This matchup has more than just that, but that alone has so many good character interactions and fight potential within there is awesome. Izuru is one of the heads of the Ultimate Despair, so it's causing the world to fall into ruin, and with Deku being the number one hero, their fight makes sense. You could also have some wild stuff, like the fight taking place after the Despair has destroyed the world, and Deku is the leader of the Resistance of Hope that tries to take down Izuru. The fight would start with Izuru having his bored nature, thinking Izuku is just nobody compared to him, but being proven quite wrong. Throughout this fight, Izuru would become much more serious and for the first time in his life actually have to try. Deku meanwhile would fight Izuru but also want to save him, trying to talk to Izuru mid-fight only for Izuru to talk him down, but not really calling him boring due to how he's giving him a challenge. Throughout the fight, Izuru would go on to end up enjoying himself somewhat, since, while he hasn't ever exactly been looking for a challenge, he never has been challenged, so finally having that be put to the test would bring out more of his talents and clashing with each other. Izuru's higher intellect and being able to figure out Deku's shortcomings would be another part of the fight, but Deku also having his fairly high amount of intellect would also, allow him to keep up. Deku could also have moments such as noticing how Izuru's luck works and trying to figure out ways to counter it. Eventually, the fight ends with one of two ways in my opinion. Firstly, either Deku wins and you have him being surrounded and constantly being affected by Izuru's luck, only to overpower it and overcome fate itself in order to beat Izuru with one last punch to the face. If Izuru wins, you can have him outbox Deku before eventually using one of his weapons to stab him in the stomach. Izuru could almost be sad that Deku is dying, calling him not boring, but by far, my favourite ending for this fight is similar to what is going on in the My Hero Academia manga right now. Deku would realise he couldn't win and would use his last-ditch effort to attack and using One For All to hit Izuru and attack him from the inside. As this happens, Izuru would be smart enough to try and resist it, but the memories of Deku and Hajime would begin to blend together, before Deku then appears within Hajime's memories and manages to save him from becoming Despair and bring Hajime out of Izuru. You can have Deku talk to Hajime before the Izuru Kamakura project and inspire hope within him and manage to save Hajime from becoming Izuru, at least mentally. The fight can end with Izuru winning, but Deku successfully turning Izuru back into Hajime and saving him like Deku wanted to in the fight. It can be filled with so much character, with Hajime shedding tears, talking about how he's been brought back to his true self, and vowed to stop the ultimate despair, now with all of his talents and One For All. This has so much potential for very powerful storytelling, and I'm all for it. Next up, the spin-offs, aka Ultra Despair Girls, the anime, and other Danganronpa media. Honourable mentions. Haji Toa vs Princess Leia would have got on the list if Haji wasn't a fucking pedophile. Monica Toa vs Baby is surprisingly good, but not enough to make the list. Monica vs Nier is alright too, but I've got no clue how a fight between them would actually work. Monica versus Perka is also really good and probably should have made the top 10 on this list, but my dumbass bias kept it at number 11. Shirokuma versus Glamrock Freddy is meh. It's fine, but it's meh. Komaru versus Ritsu has good connections, but not a good fight potential at all. Yuri Samadari versus Sarah Shidoin has a lot of potential to be a really good matchup, but as I'm writing this, I've only just started the second Kirigiri novel out of 7, so I don't yet have the full scope of this matchup and what it can become. Similarly, Yuri versus Mia also has very good potential, but again, I'll fill out the rest of the connections after I finish the novels. Lastly, Juzo Sakakura versus Naomichi Kuramada and Kazuo Tengen versus Chairman Rose are both very good as well, but neither could overcome the sheer stupidity and coolness of number 10, so... Number 10. Great Gozu versus Rokujushi Mio. They are two male characters from popular anime series, though Mio's not been animated yet. They are both the best wrestlers around, and they're both very weird looking and would also seem aggressive, yet serve to help the main characters with their survival and genuinely seem to be good people due to this. And due to this also they become fan favourites. They also end up participating in games which involve many people dying, but contrast with Rokujushi willingly participating in the culling games, while the Great Gozu unwillingly participated in the final killing game and died during it. They both also end up fighting hot-headed guys who help or just seek to kill the main cast, being Naoya Zenin and Kyosuke Murakata. They both do their best to fend them off, but never actually defeat them. Both of their time in the story is sadly really short-lived. The fight is also really fun. You could have an old-style wrestling match within Mio's Domain expansion, where Great Gozu and Mio show off their skill as combatants, along with their ideologies with wrestling, and eventually grow as people and as fighters throughout the, domain. It's stupid, it's fun, and I love it. Number 9. The Warriors of Hope versus Team Star. They are two video game antagonistic groups, both of which have very colourful members. They both once attended incredibly famous schools which nurture their talents. Despite the actions throughout the game, at the end of the day they are just kids who were treated horribly, which caused them to become an antagonistic group, which they are now. They were both founded by a powerful female character who hasn't physically been with them most of the game, being Junko and Penny. The formation of their groups also gets the attention of other nameless children who are mistreated to join them and revolt against the adults, and also they create and use giant robots to fight. The matchup vibes is kind of funny. The Warriors of Hope versus Team Star having a giant mech fight is also pretty cool to see. Number 8. Sonosuke Izai versus Rudo Schurbek. I am not pronouncing that right, but fuck you. The two male characters who were very quiet and secluded, both known for creating weapons and were punished for crimes they didn't commit. They both really, really like sweets, and both have a love interest with a girl, but contrast with Raraka staying with Izai after the false charges, while Chiwa left after Rudo was framed. They would both go on to join organisations made to combat, and kill threats of the world, being the Future Foundation and the Cleaners. They both fight deranged serial killers. They both specifically join groups within the organisations as well, being the Branch Office 9 and Team Akuta. Honestly, this works really well as a physical hand-to-hand fight. Too bad it's a really big stomp. Number 7. Monica Toa versus Getsus. They are two green-haired leaders of villainous groups dedicated to ending the abuse of Pokemon/children at the hands of trainers/adults, and create a world where they can be free and happy, utilising underlings that are conditioned to genuinely believe this cause due to their upbringing, and Getsus's and Monica's emotional manipulation, alongside the other underlings under their thumb as well. The plan they proposed was merely just a ruse, however, as their true intention was far more sinister, as Getsus' plan was for trainers to release all their Pokemon so nobody could stop him from taking over the world. Meanwhile, Monica was just to become Junko Enoshiwa's successor and plunge the world into despair. And their personalities are far more cruel and conniving to boot. They both control or command armies to fights, being Getsus' team of Pokemon and Monokuma's, the units. They both contrast with how Getsus' treatment of N mirrors what Junko did to Monokuma, grooming them into becoming the perfect pawns to carry out their plan, with Getsus taking in N as an orphan and isolating him from the world to warp his perspective of trainers. Meanwhile, Junko took Monica in after years of abuse from her family to show her the closest thing to kindness she's ever experienced, to take her down a route of despair. One reason why I really like this is because Getsus and Monica are the exact thing the opposite hates. For Getsus, Monica is just another warped, stuck up, and really annoying kid standing in his way. Meanwhile, for Monica, Getsus is an adult that targeted children like her and abused them for his own satisfaction, and would also then just make them the prime targets for both sides. It's a mech versus a Pokemon fight. What's there not to love? Filled with character as well. Number 6. Takumi Hajira versus Koichi Hamawari. They're both the main protagonists of manga-exclusive prequel vigilante stories to the main series. They both missed out on the majority of their school lives due to an incident related to them and their friend, indirectly leading them to become the weirdos they are known for towards their colleagues. They also both look up to people who are considered the strongest or the greatest within their verse, being All Might as the number one hero, and Mukuro as the ultimate soldier, in loving admiration, which is also why they're vigilantes. For a short period of time, they performed under different pseudonyms for a local area. They're also good friends with an older director of an organisation which brings hope to the people who they try to save from. They're also trying to find the identity of a vigilante using special methods, not knowing that they speak to them on a daily basis. Though once the truth came out, they didn't have many different opinions on them. They both also have odd obsessions towards stuff when not fighting, and even while fighting helps them with weird effects, with All Might's hoodies and small spaces. They also both become important parts of their friends' lives, and are parts of an incident that started it all, falling in love with them. During the climax, they both fight against their old best friend and promise to kill their new partners who they've come to cherish, which involved putting them at a huge target across multiple cities. Bringing the heroes to the world to stop them, acting directly through an impulse on saving them, and everyone else trying to kill them, leading to exposing their identities to the world as a vigilante, but eventually convinces them to stop due to the connections that they have with some. They also have an old friend who kills himself at some point to try and prove a point, leaving them with a permanent scar. They also both save their love interest from impending doom, who confesses their affection afterwards. And yeah, very fun fight, slide and glide versus the various murder techniques that Takumi has. It would be very fun to see. I know that was a bunch of word salad probably, but I don't really care. Number 5. Seiko Kamuri versus Harry Osborn. There are two characters who are part of contrasting organisations with antagonistic leaders who were once best friends with a student with supernatural talent. However, despite this, they end up resenting them, feeling like they were betrayed by them, despite the fact that there was no ill will against them, which results in them trying to kill their friends. This makes their relationship all the more complicated due to being their best friend at some point. They both use enhancers to increase their strength and speed to fight others, being drugs in the Goblin Serum. They both end up saving the main character's love interest from death, being Kyoko Kirigiri and Mary Jane. They contrast with being a victim of brainwashing, however, with Kimura's resulting in her suicide and was suspected to be mass murders at some point, and Harry's brainwashing leading him to lead a better life. They also both die via indirect suicide and were both suspected to be mass murderers at some point. They both create drugs which can heal people. Honestly, pretty fun fight, considering how vicious Seiko can be while she's drugged up, and the weapons that Harry has at his disposal is very fun. Who wins? Well, we have a Marvel character here, so that should answer the question. Number 4. Komaru Naegi and Toko Fukawa versus Yuri Honjo and Mayoko Nise. These two are schoolgirl duos who survive in a world filled with deadly beings of many different types, some of which are non-hostile and are on the hero's side. They both have allies who dislike murder and violence. One of the duo uses a type of gun, being Komaru and Yuri. The other uses a type of blade, being Toku and Mayuko. The two that have the bladed weapons also have superhuman strength and enhanced physical abilities, while the ones with the gun are much more calmed and determined with their personality and wanting to help their brothers. Personally, this just vibes a lot more than most of Komaru's other matchups, with Toko's best matchup, which is in a duo with Komaru. Since no one can ever seem to describe to me why En and Uzumi works for the two of them, this is just my favourite for them by default. Number 3. Jataro Kamuri versus Gutaro. They're both male antagonists who work in a powerful group which is led by a manipulative and terrifying leader who they can never cross. They both suffered trauma when they grew up due to everyone around them, including their parents, saying that they have a really ugly face. However, their parents die before the main story. They contrast with this, however, with Gutaro embracing his ugliness in order to make him more feared, while Jataro had his face covered up. They also contrast with Gutaro actually being hideous, while Jataro wasn't, and was merely told that and he believed it. They're also both cold-blooded killers who are dead set on trying to kill a set of people. and both have connections to being kids to some extent. Well, Gyutaro became a demon while he was a child, while Jotaro is outright a child. They both work alongside a girl who is similar age to them, who also have a very fucked up childhood involving older men, which also moulded them into being killers with an obsession with looking pretty, being Dake and Kotoko. Prior to the main story, they almost die but are saved by a blonde psychotic villain who set them on a new path. They both show jealous and aggressive tendencies to those who they think are more pretty than them, providing they aren't their ally at least. They also both contrast, with Gyutaro being a demon and Jotaro killing who he deems to be demons. They're also both defeated relatively quickly by comparison to their peers, with Gyutaro and Dake being the first upper moons to die and Jotaro being defeated second out of the Warriors of Hope. This also happens because they fight two people at once, being Tanjiro and Tengen and Komaru and Toko, all of which is made up of a person who's learned to develop into a courageous fighter, but is still very kind despite having a death-filled past, being Tengen and Toko. They also kill people through large explosions, though it's not their primary method of attack. They also are both shown to have quote-unquote professions, being Gyutaro being a debt collector and Jotaro being a priest. They also contrast with Muzan stating that Gyutaro is one of his favourites, while Monika openly hates Jotaro. They also both have ties to art, with Gyutaro's technique being called the Demon Blood Art and Jotaro being the ultimate little artist. They also both fight with inhuman ways, being a demon and using a giant robot. They also are seen with tools on them, being a sickle and a hammer, make your communist jokes here. Both of them also have a psychotic thrill of being hated, and both force the main characters to use two separate powers or techniques at the same time for the first time in the series, being sun breathing and water breathing, and break and knockback. The connections are very good and the fight is very fun, with Gyutaro fighting Jotaro's mech. All in all, it speaks for itself. Number 2. Komaru Naegi versus Emma. There are two female kid protagonists who end up in a seemingly post-apocalyptic setting where they are trapped within a specific place with the threat of death constantly looming over them from an inhuman species, both of which have a weak spot in the eye. Despite this, they both lived relatively comfortable lives, with Emma living in an orphanage blissfully, meanwhile Komaru lived in an isolated flat. They both travel around with another dark-haired character of a similar age to them who are really close to them, but act like they don't like them, being Rei and Toko. They both end up running into monsters who they are supposed to be trying to kill them, but swore to be allies with them, unlike the rest, being Majuka and Sonju and Shirokuma, who have a safe base for them to hide in. Of course, these two come as a two, being Majuka and Sonju and Shirokuma and Kirokuma. Despite this, their actions were just a facade hiding their true desires, with Sonju longing for the day for him to hunt humans again, and Shirokuma being an AI of Junko, but both aren't revealed to the main cast at all. They both go on to find the only surviving group of humans left who formed a resistance, led by an older, more experienced individual with a personal history with the monsters, being Lucas and Hagitoa, otherwise Kaji. Both are also trapped in another part of an already fucked up world and forced to participate in games, where they're hunted down by an inhuman species for fun, within a city setting, given weapons to them by the creators to make it more fun. Due to this, they go from being very scared people to being very brave, literally having to fight off the creatures and kill them, using the very weapons that they were given by them, from the creatures. Despite this, they still feel a level of sympathy for those who are trying to kill them, despite the fact that they are trying to kill them. They both come into conflict with someone on their side because of this, another leader who's actively trying to kill all of them due to what they went through, being Norman and Hagitoa. They both also have moments where they could have escaped themselves but chose not to in order to save everybody. They also save themselves and those around them, but at a cost, with Emma being forced to forget her family and friends, meanwhile Komaru was not able to destroy all of the Monokumas and had to stay behind in order to help rebuild. Both of which also involve a childlike or outright a child, leaders/deities who should be against them, being him and Monika Toa. They also both contrast, with Emma being trapped in a world with demons, being hunted down by demons, meanwhile Komaru is trapped in a city and being hunted down by the Warriors of Hope, who see Komaru as a demon. I honestly really love this. The fight potential isn't amazing, but you can really show off their athleticism and good use of the environment. Even if the hat gun can't hurt Emma physically, the two of them would just use the environment and manipulate the environment to their advantage to hurt each other. And number 1. Kyosuke Munakata vs Sanmei Shinazugura. They are both aggressive, white-haired swordsmen from anime who hold high-ranked titles within groups which combat evil within the world, being Future Foundation and the Demon Slayer Corps. They're also both the second highest within this hierarchy, with Kyosuke being the vice president and Sanemi being the second strongest Hashira. They both lived relatively normal lives before horrific tragedy in their lives, which turned their personalities into being cold and ruthless. Despite being on the side of good, they come into conflict with the main character and hating their outlook on things, preferring to fight rather than talk it out. Both had someone close to them join the people who they went on to fight, with Chisa being brainwashed into despair and Sanemi's mother becoming a demon, which leads to their deaths. Both explicitly have powerful titles of leadership, the Ultimate Student Council President and the Wind Hashira. They both end up fighting someone who is behind the suffering that they are in, being Kazuo and Muzan. Eventually, someone who they cared for deeply would succumb to their wounds in battle, but only after playing a vital role in saving Kyosuke and Sanemi, with Juzo turning off all of the power in the building, and Genya being a pivotal role in the Kokushibo fight. They also both fight very powerful swordsmen or swordswomen who both have very powerful titles, being Peko Peko Yama, the ultimate swordswoman, and Kokushibo, Upper Moon 1. Both of whom were once good people, but in the fights, or by the time they fight them, have become evil. They also both receive incurable damage to their face during fights, with Kyosuke being stabbed in the eye and Sanemi having scars all across his face. They both believe that no one on the enemy's side can be saved and wishes to kill them. This then which is caused with the conflicts with the main character due to being friends with some people on the opposite side. They contrast with Kyosuke being the one to kill the leader within the group he works for, meanwhile Sanemi religiously protects his leader with all of his life, and both of their blades also have an element of heat behind them, with Kyosuke literally having a fire sword and Sanemi having a Nichiren blade which comes from the energy of the sun. There's a hell of a lot of potential for fight interaction and also choreography. You can have a really fun fight, a sword fight between the two. Honestly, I'm not sure if they would respect each other or hate each other with a violent passion, and I think that makes it work even better. Now then, the final part of this video, Danganronpa V3. Honourable mentions, Kokichi Oma vs Beyond Birthday, Gonta Gokuhara vs Koji Koda, and Gonta Gokuhara vs Blanca are all cool but couldn't really make the list. Kokichi vs Shin is cool and in concept works, but honestly I'm not that big of a fan on it since there were other better matchups for Kokichi and Shin in my opinion. Himiko Yumeno vs Trucy Wright is really cute, but honestly has nothing to it for a matchup, other than being a really cool crossover rather than a fight. Ritano Amami vs Kai Sato is also really cool, but we hardly have anything to go off for both of them, so it doesn't really work. Kaede Akamatsu vs Seira Todon is cool, but outshunned by Hajime vs Seira to the point where it's not even funny. Kaede vs Kazuma, on the other hand, is really cool, and it actually really works, but it couldn't really make the list due to how little we see of Kaede relative to everyone else in the list here. Tenko Chabishara vs Tai Lung is funny, but that's it. Kaito Momota vs Kamina is very cool in concept, but I haven't seen Gurren Lagann, so I don't have much personal attachment to it. Shuichi vs L. Lolliot and Shuichi vs Phoenix Wright have also both grown on me, but not enough to make the list. Finally, Korekyo Shinguji vs Norman Bates. They're not on the list because, despite having really good connections and having a really cool fight interaction, if you know both characters, you understand why I can't bring myself to like it. Like, I would have to put a massive trigger warning in the video to explain their connections, and that alone should explain it. If you're morbidly curious, do your own research. Anyways, number 10. Kokichi Oma vs Baroque Van Zieks. This mostly works because of another matchup I'll talk about later, but I'll talk about why this can stand on its own 2 feet here. They're both very intelligent male characters from rival game franchises with purple hair, both known for wearing a cape. They both have evil titles, being the Ultimate Supreme Leader and the Reaper of the Bailey, but contrast with Kokichi being a petty criminal and Van Zieks being a prosecutor. These two also have a strange obsession with the main character, as Kokichi is obsessed with Shuichi and Baroque only appears in court whenever Ryunosuke does in order to battle him. Both Van Zieks and Kokichi are shot or attempted to be shot by someone at some point due to a byproduct of their actions in court, which causes people to die, which results in people trying to kill them. Attempts on their lives come about due to an incident with highly advanced technology which ends up with someone else dying, being the Neo World program and the super high voltage instantaneous kinesis. Both of them have 2 blonde scientists at the heart of the case, being Miyu and Albert. They both have titles which directly place them above others, with Kokichi being a supreme leader and Banziks being of noble blood. They also play a big part of the fourth trial of the games they are in, being the suspects to being a killer, killing someone who was close to the main characters, being Miyu Aruma and Inspector Tobias Gregson. And everybody believes it's them except the main characters who have to defend them, with the prosecution, quote-unquote, being led by someone close to the main characters, which creates conflict, being Kaito Momota and Kazuma Asogi. There's honestly a lot more to this, but just the idea of Baroque being absolutely done with Kokichi's shit and throwing a glass of wine at him is very fun and enough for me to like it. Number 9. Tsumugi Shirogane vs Christoph Gavin. There are two somewhat similar looking antagonists who both have a thing for fashion. They both outwitted world-class intellects who solve crimes, being Shuichi Saihara and Phoenix Wright, both of whom come back later to defeat them. They both secretly murdered innocents and try and frame others for it in a debate and trials, and both were inevitably defeated due to the main character convincing a group of people overseeing the trial from the background. Honestly, this matchup doesn't have much, but it does vibe a lot with me. I mean, if you look at the thumbnail, they have many similar sprites. It's honestly vibing a lot. Number 8. Shuichi Saihara vs Wato Hojo. There are two aspiring teenage detectives from murder mystery visual novels, with plots surrounding around being trapped in death games. Both for years were haunted with the guilt of incidents in their past being ironically contradicting each other with terms of success, as Wato failed to catch the person responsible for the death of Saika, while Shuichi feels responsible for catching a murderer who he later found out had only murdered to get revenge on someone who drove his family to suicide. During the prologue of their respective games, this is revealed. Shortly after coming to their senses and falling out of a literal locker, at the start of this and their games, they both meet and become a part of a cast of people specialised with talents and given titles, with the Detective Alliance being composed of the top detectives who specialise in unique methods of solving cases, and Danganronpa V3 being a compound of students who are among the best at what they do. Among the people in their group, a kind-hearted but also incredibly skilled female proves and provides moral support, being Saika and Kaede, who are suspected of being killers upon the first dead body being found, with the first dead body being arguably the most important member of the group, being Senior Detective and Rentaro Mami, but both eventually have their names cleared. While initially they both start out with little confidence in themselves, they both slowly grow more confident over time and are helped with the fact that with their allies around them. Eventually, the death of Saika and Kaede would both occur and mentally destroy them, but that would only act as further motivation to help discover who was the murderer in the first place. Towards the later part of their games, they both learn the harsh truth that their memories of the past were not what they'd quite remembered them to be. Despite that, they refuse to give up and choose to keep pushing forward and end the killings once and for all. There's also a fun contrast with Wato's alias being the incompetent detective, while Shuichi is called the ultimate detective. There's more to this, such as their cases being very similar, but I don't think I need to go on. This matchup is really good, and honestly not higher because I don't know Wato Hojo or Process of Elimination. Yeah, this list is pretty stacked and I'm already splitting hairs. Anyways, number 7. Tsumugi Shirogane vs Lord Mael's Strongheart, the superior Tsumugi vs Ace Attorney matchup. There are two twist antagonists from popular visual novel games which involve solving murders within trials. They both are the main killers and antagonists who work in the background for the vast majority of the game, either directly killing or manipulating others into killing people, even manipulating friends into killing friends. They are both twist villains as they were both with the main character since the start of the story and posed as good people. They both are absolute powers within their worlds, with Strongheart being the Chief of Justice and Tsumugi being the Mastermind. They were both put in the corner by the main protagonist for their crimes, but managed to manipulate the rest into if they should declare them guilty / vote for them due to the general interest of who's there. They both are defeated by a higher power who isn't even physically present, being the Queen in the real world. They both oversee everything and were both influenced by the main character into their actions and truly believe what they're doing is the right thing. Strongheart being the Reaper, who often depicted Baroque's dead brother being acting as divine justice, and Tsumugi carrying out a killing game very similar to the late Junko Enoshima. And both of their establishments, which they loved so dearly, would literally go up in flames. Honestly, a very fun debate to see, as they both challenge each other, and also the very systems that they're in as well, which I think works really well. Number 6. Miyu Iruma versus Mei Hatsume. They are two goggle-wearing female characters who appear in popular manga and attend schools meant for harnessing and developing talents. They are both skilled in creating machines and equipment, and are both considered the best at doing so. They're both assertive and self-proclaimed geniuses, and have sexual-related themes not just to their personalities but their machines as well. Even long after their characters are relevant, their technology is still used and greatly useful, and to outright being necessary for the heroes to win battles. They contrast with Miyu going on to become an attempted murderer, meanwhile Mei works to help other heroes. Honestly, this fight can get really creative since both of them have a lot of different weapons at their disposal, and honestly can have a really cool fight. Number 5. Krekyo Shinguji vs Mini Maimi. They are both murderers from popular detective visual novel games. Their main motive for murder involves a dead sister. The murder they commit involves resurrection or possession in some way, and they both have a fascination for an occult, or at least pretend to. This matchup has barely any connections, but for some reason, and I don't know why, I fuck with this idea so much. It's not like it's got outstanding fight potential either, I just really like it. Number 4. Kibo vs N. They are both teenage robots who are learning and growing as AIs, but at surface level are very imposing and threatening due to them being outsiders from the rest of the cast. However, are actually the complete opposite on the inside. They both have very similar personalities, being socially awkward people who are treated as complete jokes by others, especially in their circles or groups. They don't really know how to handle romantic or even just mutual friendships due to their very quirky and bullyable personalities. They also both look very similar with grey metal skin, glowing colourful eyes, and light grey metal hair. They also both wear hats if you consider Kibo's pre-V3 design as well. They both envy humans and copy and replicate them to become more human themselves, which just makes them look more goofy than anything. They both have a female friend who's possibly a love interest, who is a genius mechanic and who is very skilled with craftsmanship of creating new arsenals, weapons and such, who on the surface are very rude and brutish and mean to people, but are actually very flawed teenage girls with a troubled past when you look into them. They both also have a bully who consistently bullies them for their own entertainment, who are also both antagonists for a short time before they are murdered through other outside forces. They both live in apocalyptic worlds where humanity is extinct on Earth, where they're on contrasting missions with goals and design. Kibo was chosen by the Homespeak Academy to survive and live along with the rest of the class with the Gopher Project. Meanwhile, Serial Designation N was sent to Earth along with his fellow drones to murder and all remaining worker drones on the planet with a one-way trip. Both also share mysterious pasts where they can't remember much due to being amnesiacs, but they do remember one of, if not the only human who they really loved, being Professor Ibadashi and Tessa, both of which they cared for greatly, but are separated. They both also have their minds screwed with again, which makes them more violent and rogue, and deadly monsters go on a rampage, as they kill or destroy anything in their way. They also are updated with new weapons and abilities to go on this rampage. Shortly after, they were deep in thought and answered their inner questions which they never asked before, which resulted in them discovering dark truths on their missions and design, which resulted in them holding a great grudge against their supposed human creators. This works really well and can have a really cool fight considering their awkward personalities, which can lead to a lot of personality-fueled interactions as well. Number 3. Maki Harukawa vs Yor Forger. They are two dark-haired female assassins who are considered the best at what they do. They hide their assassin nature by nurturing a child or children, with Maki being a child caregiver and Yor looking after Anya. They both grew up without parents and only became assassins to protect people who they were close to. They both eventually fall for two guys who they're almost forced with living, being Kaito and Lloyd Forger, and both Maki and Yor have superhuman strength and use poisons at the tip of their weapons to kill. This doesn't have many as connections as Kibo vs N, but I love Maki and Yor as characters, and the connections just work so well. The fight is also really cool too, with a hand-to-hand fight and weapon versus weapon potential. Number 2. Kokichi Oma vs So Hiyori. They are two male characters who appear as antagonistic figures within visual novel games, despite not being the main antagonists. They participate in very similar killing games, just see Hajime vs Sarah. Both of the killing games also have very similar members, including a detective who stopped doing detective work due to trauma relating to it, a main character who had their best friend, or potential crush, die after the first trial, an eccentric scientist with adult themes, a quiet, serious character who dies in Chapter 1 but turned out to be super significant to the plot after their deaths were discovered. They both have ties to have set up the killing game as well. A very skilled artist who ends up being a bit selfish in the end and ends up dying, a non-human character who ends up with an advanced AI, a naive best friend to the main character who cheers everyone up with their naivety but ends up dying, a lovable murderer, and an ex-sportsman. They are also both parts of evil organisations, being Dice and Asunoro. They're also both the smartest and most cunning and vile people within their worlds, known for constantly lying and manipulating numerous people. They both wear scarves and are deemed to be the master of some kind, with Kokichi being the ultimate supreme leader, and So being the floor master. Both of their pasts are shrouded in mystery, only having small snippets confirmed about it. Both die in a situation where they almost intentionally kill themselves while involving another person within the killing game. But contrast, as it was always part of Kokichi's plan to die and have Kaito survive, while So intended for Gin to die but ended up dying himself. Honestly, I like this a lot more than Shin vs Kokichi, because Kokichi vs So has all the connections that Shin does and more, besides maybe like one. Not to mention that Kokichi vs Shin's fight potential is really just the same as Imposter or the Ultimate Imposter vs Shin, but with less character moments and being less believable as to why they would push each other as to being voted. Meanwhile, the idea of Kokichi going up against the real So has a very unique intellect-based battle with the death games, and I think it'd be really awesome to see Kokichi try and outsmart So at his own death game. And number 1, Shuichi Saihara versus Ryunosuke Naruhodo. Anyone who's been a part of my Discord server knows this is coming, but I'm not going to list all of the connections this time. Why is that? That's because the word count is literally 2,414 words for just the connections alone. That's 2 times longer than the longest essays that high schoolers write, and nearly 7 times the character length you would have for a single Discord message. So yeah, if you want the full connections, there will be a link in the description. The main gist of the matchup is that they are 2 male characters of Ace Attorney and Danganronpa games, but come from unique entries due to their placement in the timeline, with one in the past and one in the future. Their games are also set very far away from their homelands, and are also having new fan favourite mini-games where you try and convince multiple people at once, being the Scrum Debate and Summonation Examination. The 2 of them have best friends which practically hold their hands and help them through the first trial of the games, but end up dying afterwards, leaving Shuichi and Ryunosuke absolutely distraught, but to pick up their position and go on from where they left off and carry out their wishes. They both participate in trials which leave a sour taste in their mouth, essentially because the conclusion was wrong, but they didn't know that until the end of the stories, where they exposed the conclusion that they reached was wrong. They both also end up going up against the very system they are in and ultimately win, with an outsider viewer looking in managing to end the cycle of violence which plagued them and everyone who came before them. The main core theme is that they're main protagonists who want to get to the truth no matter what and no matter how despair-inducing it is. This matchup is so awesome and I highly recommend you go see it for yourselves. Anyways, that's the video. Before ending it, I suppose some of you would want to know my combined top 10 list, combining all the parts into one, so here it is. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, make sure to like, subscribe, comment below your thoughts on the matchups, and I'll see you next time.